They just felt like filler red herring the whole time.
They might also have another purpose. It expands the cast and gives us a slightly larger pool of potential victims. Because at this point, it's what, Uma and Howard?
Like even Bakula came in. Scott Bakula.
Yes.
Who was not the killer. I was wrong. That was, I'll admit when I'm wrong. Okay.
Next season.
Scott Bakula. And you had mentioned to me that you didn't like Sherlock, I believe. And I might be wrong. I might be mistaken here. But like
I love Sherlock.
Maybe you didn't tell me this, but somebody told me this and brought this up about Sherlock.
And I love Benedict Cumberbatch.
Hello and welcome to Road Goes Ever On and On. Today, Sterling and I are talking about the season finale of Only Murders in the Building, Season 4, My Best Friend's Wedding. And if you're enjoying our content, a like would be really helpful, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos that we're going to do. We have Silo Season 2 around the corner, and after that, Severance Season 2. And with that, Sterling, what are your overall thoughts on the season?
I thought it was a great season. I think like the idea of having this all be around film with the trip to Hollywood kind of kicking it off was great. And I think that this episode started off with Sazz's note from the author. If you actually look at the script,
Yep.
I paused on the frame where it had the note from the author. That's like what we hear her saying in the very beginning.
Yeah.
Which was very appropriate.
Yeah, and I love that because I feel like each episode we had like different narrators and it like was all in canon. Like these narrators would say some of these things at the beginning of the episodes, and to have that in the script was perfect.
It was brilliant. It was a great way to hear her voice again and have it be something that is so appropriate, so in canon, but also kind of meta about what we're dealing with, because she said something about a movie is 100 people working together to tell one story. And in this season, we saw writers, directors, actors, stunt people, background. We saw classic films. We saw like trash. We saw big budget films with like CGI.
Documentaries.
Like it was a whole love for all of it and all of the people involved. So I thought it was great.
I might disagree a little bit. Okay. Sorry. Let me back up. I do feel like the season was really good. Like, I think I really enjoyed the season. I loved...
But what, like the commercials weren't good?
Right. I hated the commercials. Hulu, it's getting expensive, so I've got the ads going, and, it just really cut the tension every time one of those ads would pop up. But no, I mean, I think where I'm kind of going with this is, like, I don't know if I feel satisfied how the end happened.
Okay.
So... I think overall, like, this was a really strong season. I liked it, but I think there were also some things that I might disagree with this season as a whole. And a lot of this comes from my comparison for last season, because I think the last season was really strong, and it had a similar love for theater production.
Theater in that case, yeah.
And, like, we focused on the theater. Like, there wasn't a lot of, like, outside of the theater that we dealt with. And as much as I love the Westies and I love their inclusion, I feel like that a lot of their story was not relevant to what was going on. They just felt like filler red herring the whole time to just get to the end.
They might also have another purpose. I think they might also be filling the role of, as more people die in the Arconia, we have a smaller cast of who's left. Because at this point, it's, as far as the regulars go, it's what, Uma and Howard?
Yep.
So if somebody needs to die that's not just like a random person that they kind of introduce in the season, that's about all that we have at this point. So I think potentially this like expands the cast of the Arconia. If they come back, I don't know. Maybe they don't come back. But if they come back, then it expands the cast in the Arconia and gives us a slightly larger pool of potential victims for future seasons, as well as like just reoccurring characters within the Arconia that you can have fun interactions with.
And that's fair. And like I said, I love the Westies, but I felt like they were such a central focus to this season when to me, I think they should have done more about the production. Like, I felt like there was two things going on at once. There's the production of the film, and then there's the Westies, where like the last season, it was all about the theater, all about the production. Everybody that was part of the show was a suspect. Everybody was looked at. And I think that with something that had so much to do with the production of this, the production took almost a backseat compared to the Westies, and then the Westies didn't really provide anything to the whole murder scheme of the murder of Sazz is what we were looking at.
Yeah, they were fun and they were red herrings. And so I can see how you can feel like maybe they were taking away from like the production aspect, but I loved them, especially I loved all of them. Kumail Nanjiani and Vince Fish.
Yeah,
were the two faves of mine, but I enjoyed all of them. I'm curious, I saw an article and it was saying that this season was very self-indulgent and overindulgent. In particular, it kind of pointed out the huge cast, because it was just like name after name after name. And they were saying that potentially you could bring in smaller names, and give people a chance to kind of cut their teeth on a production like this. I have thoughts on that. I'm curious what you think. Like, agree, disagree?
Well, I mean, so there was a big cast. Like, one, I feel like the guy that plays Vince Fish, he's not a huge star. He is a character actor that...
Yes.
He plays small bits in TV shows, and I always feel like I butcher his name, Rudy.
Kumail Nanjiani.
Kumail Nanjiani. I think he's really big, but I didn't think he had a lot to do in this season. The other two really big actors, Paul Rudd, Meryl Streep, they were kind of in the last season, so they almost to me feel like part of the cast a little bit and not special guests. The actors,
the three actors, Doreen and like the director, I think are the big ones,
and Téa Leoni at the end.
Yes
Téa Leoni, I can give him a pass because I think she's going to be big in the next season. Melissa McCarthy, I think she was fun, and I think that was a good cameo. But I do think that the three actors was a little bit, like, they didn't really do much. Like, they solved the plot hole thing. But I think this also comes back to that idea of, like, we should have focused more on the production because it was centered around this production versus, like, going to the Westies where like the trio of actors don't really have anything to do with the Westies other than they just showed up and interrogated them with them to like get into character. So I do think it was a little bloated, and I feel like with Eugene Levy, Zach Galifianakis, Ava Longoria, they didn't get as much room to shine as if, like...
I don't know if they could have afforded them the whole time.
Well, that's true. Well, it's surprisingly, they're in a lot of episodes.
They're in a lot of episodes. I can definitely see how a show like this could have some smaller names and give them a chance to really kind of flex their things. But this was all about Hollywood. And to me, it felt very appropriate, especially as meta as this show is. Because obviously they didn't have to have people playing themselves. They could have had actors playing movie stars.
Right.
And they could just be a fake movie stars. Like they
almost
don't have
like
to be...
Bev Mellon. Bev Mellon was played by Shannon.
Yeah.
Molly
so like
Shannon.
They could have done that easily. But this show is so meta to me that I loved it being real actors playing themselves. And it's not the first time that they've had, like from episode 1 or 2 with Sting, they've had people playing themselves. So to me, it's a certain like kind of callback and a certain kind of meta aspect. And what better way to show the opulence and the bigness of Hollywood than to have actual big stars. I loved some of those early jokes. Oliver pretending he didn't really know who Zach was or Carrie,
Right.
I felt like there was good banter because of this. So I disagreed with that.
I mean, but I do enjoy the actors, and I feel like it is very fun. This has been a very like Steve Martin Short thing, and they have just like brought in these celebrities being themselves. And I did love the Ron Howard bit where, he had his little jokes. So I like the actors. Like the actors didn't bother me. Like never once was I watching this season and being like, this is too many people I recognize. Like I do enjoy them. Like even Bakula came in. Scott Bakula.
Yes.
Who was not the killer? I was wrong. That was, I'll admit when I'm wrong. Okay.
Next season.
Scott Bakula. But
I mean, this is like the second season. He wasn't in the previous season, but he was name dropped.
Right.
So he is like part of the show over 2 seasons now. So
yeah,
who knows? Maybe he comes back.
But yeah, I think overall, because there was so much of like both stories, they could have done a whole season with the Westies, with the touching conclusion of the end of Dudenoff and like what happened. Like that could have been a whole season on its own. And this film one could have been a whole season on its own.
Okay. How did you feel about this as a last episode for whether it's this season or just kind of in general?
So, and I think also this episode is what makes me feel this way, because I most of the season I was really enjoying it. But like how the episode ended, I felt like there was a lot crammed into it for it, the shortness of it. And I think a couple problems that I have is that like
there was a lot crammed into this episode.
Yeah, and whenever we like get the murderer, there's always some like really well-written thing to make us like not believe it's the murderer. This episode, instead of like really trying to like figure out like, oh, was it Marshall? Was it this? It was like, we knew it was Marshall right away. He told us everything that happened. I think one thing that you mentioned to me, I think a long time ago, was the show Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yes.
And you had mentioned to me that you didn't like Sherlock, I believe. And I might be wrong. I might be mistaken here. But like
I love Sherlock.
Maybe you didn't tell me this, but somebody told me this and brought this up about Sherlock.
And I love Benedict Cumberbatch.
Well, yeah, I love him too. But in those episodes of Sherlock, there's not like clues that the audience can see to help like like solve the mystery. Like and Benedict Cumberbatch always just like points out random things like as he solves the case that he was just like that nobody could pick up as the audience. So like the audience can't solve the case when they're going through it. With Sazz becoming a writer, we had already established what her dream was of the trampoline park in New Jersey. So seeing that now she did this whole writing thing and it was all centered around that. And she had this protege that did this, and Marshall was a hunter that was just brought up in this season that his dad had this like pressure to make him a hunter. It's like all the clues to like solve the murder were given in this episode versus hinted at along the way for like the audience to pick up.
I don't think they want to give it away. This isn't The Sixth Sense where you can go back and rewatch it and be like, it was there the whole time.
Right.
Instead, it's like, yeah, you can see a few of the tiny little clues, but I think this show has potentially always been more about red herrings than it has been about legitimately giving you what you need to solve the murder. But to kind of what you're talking about, as far as having to explain so much with Marshall and having to explain so much with Sazz, I don't think that in a previous season that there has been so much to explain, because we had to explain the like motivations of both of those characters to truly understand everything. Thank goodness they revealed that Marshall was the killer last episode, because if they also had to make that reveal this episode and do all of that and give us a wedding, like there was a lot to do in this. I very much enjoyed this episode, and I was very happy with the season, but I did feel like this episode had just so much exposition or like backstory or whatever that it needed to fill in. I did like the way it landed it.
Overall, a good landing. Like I liked that instead of it being Marshall just writing this only murders in the building thing, it was a love letter to Charles from Sazz, which I thought was very heartfelt. And especially like, I know one of our commenters said that Sazz is kind of a bully to Charles. And in the earlier seasons, I see a little bit of that too. She does kind of bully him a little bit, but I think they had such like a close relationship. Like to me, Charles and Sazz were more of a sibling relationship than Charles and Doreen. Sazz's number one was Charles, and I think Charles's number one was Sazz before, the trio came into existence. And so I did making Sazz the victim and how it ended with Sazz and Charles' relationship. As much as I have like certain complaints about the season and whatnot, I think they stuck the landing. It was great. We crammed in the wedding. We got it in there. We had some meta commentary that we predicted that Meryl Streep might be the next body, and Oliver
they were going heavy with that.
Yeah. But then after he started making that assumption, then I kind of felt like she was going to be in the clear.
I definitely felt like that, but then they also had the fake out at the wedding of her not showing up on time and then Uma screaming.
Yeah.
And so they still, as soon as they pointed it out, I was like, okay, we're safe. But then they did give me some kind of pause. And I think it's interesting because it's like I think this is the first season where they really pointed out that a murder always comes in at the end. And I think that was to get audiences thinking about that, because I don't think that everybody has made that connection. And so it was kind of like setting that up. And I think that is something important to think about with this show, is like, who's next?
Right.
You know?
And Lester, the doorman, he never did anybody wrong, Lester, except he may have let a few murderers into the building, but he didn't deserve to die.
So on the first watch of this, I was really sad about what I thought was like the last interactions that Charles and Oliver had with him, because I think they were both slightly mean, kind of, from like his perspective. Oliver says the thing about like, you only let murderers in, and Charles, I don't think his is quite as mean intentionally. It's just like, he's awkward. He doesn't like interacting with people.
Yeah.
So he said the whole thing about like, not liking anecdotes, which is kind of brushing him aside, but it's just like his awkwardness. I was kind of thinking like, as last interactions, that sucks and you hold that with him. But on the second watch through, I did see that he was like dancing at the wedding, which means they probably had other interactions. They're not going to like hold that inside as the last things that they kind of said. We just didn't necessarily see the other things. And that did make me happy that he at least got to like have a nice fun time at the end. You know?
But also really sad because the story he's telling him is the one that he's explaining, because he's like, oh, I got married in that area and had that special moment in the fountain.
Right.
Like, and then, Charles is like, oh, I don't do anecdotes. Like, see you later. And then he ends up dying in that fountain. And, he still has his wedding ring on. And that's just going to be really, really sad, which I think is connected to our next season and Téa Leoni's character. What are your thoughts of where this is going?
I don't know where it's going, but one thing that I thought was interesting was when you mentioned what he said about the fountain and having the wedding there. He got married to his wife there, and he said that the fountain was their witness, which is very strange wording. And then he, of course, died in the fountain.
The fountain was his witness of his death.
Fountain was the witness of his death as well. Yes. So okay. I don't know what that means. Do with that what you will. I think we like peeked at some interesting moments with Lester this season. He did make a comment about like a picture that he was in, which and said something about like not Googling it or Googling it or something like that. When I Googled it, there's like a dude in like all pleather.
It's a gift
with like
suit.
A straw. Yes. Very,
said,
very.
You won't recognize me. But that's me.
We had a few of those kind of moments with him where we saw a little bit more of him. And I think they're definitely going to expand more. Like we'll see more of his past.
Yeah. And
I assume he's going to be connected to this story with Sophia Cacciamilio.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think so because, she tries to hire them. And they're like, oh, we're not detectives. Which, at this point, you've solved 4 murders. At least, maybe you guys should be detectives. Like you're doing better than the police do. What she says is she's like, he has more to do with this building than like anyone. I think that we're going to delve into this crime boss, maybe the history of the Arconia. Lester, who's probably worked there for a long time. He got married at the Arconia, probably has a lot of ties with Leone's husband's character. So
Yeah.
I do think we're going to get a lot of that, but who knows?
And he's only missing. We don't actually know if that character is dead or not.
Well, if you believe the news stories, then he is definitely dead.
They're doing, I think, a much better job of setting up future seasons now. And maybe it's just because I'm paying more attention. I don't really remember the Sazz ham radio reference last season.
Yeah.
It was there, apparently. But it definitely really feels like they are making you think about it from the end of the previous season. And I know that I said that first season they didn't know how it was going to end, which is why I think there's like some of the plot holes. They've changed that. Now they don't start writing until they know who's going to die so that they can kind of work backwards. I don't know if they also know who's going to die the next season. I would think that they would have probably an idea, probably like 2 seasons at this point, of who's going to die and who's going to be the murderer. I mean, I guess they could just take this whole like Lester's the one and they can just start from there. Maybe they don't have to know who the murderer is, but I'm kind of curious, like, do they know at this point?
Well, I think they have to, because they set up an episode before about this thing with this, I forget their last names, the Camachos?
Cachamilio.
They're setting it up with Leone, so I feel like it's going to be a huge part of the next story. Maybe they have like a rough draft of what's going to happen, and not everything's fleshed out.
They don't need to know all the beats. Like if they know, I think if they know those 2 things, like who's dying, who's killing,
and then
I think that's
who do they pick? Like when do they pick the body at the end of that season? Like, do they already know who's dying at the end of that season?
I would think that, like, here's my guess. This is how I would do it. As I'm planning out the season, the first thing I would want to obviously got to know, like, who's going to die this season, who's the murderer, what's the motive. And then I think before I got too far, I'd want to know the 2 people from the next season, but not necessarily have to know all the details, you know? So I think I would be like 1 season ahead with the names. But I mean, the nice thing about, like, they could even do most of 1 season and then halfway to 3/4 of the way through start working on the next season as far as like who and who. And it's honestly only a few changes that they need to make. Like, let's just say that they only knew that it was going to be Lester halfway through, 3/4 of the way through. They only need to like sprinkle him in a few scenes.
Yeah.
And it was like what they were doing for setup for next season, honestly, 5 minutes total.
Yeah.
Towards the entire season.
Right. That's true. Do you think that we'll see anything related to the first season?
I don't know about that. Like, is that an... Okay, so that brings us to something else kind of related to the future. Jan says, we're Endgame.
We're Endgame.
Charles said goodbye, and she kind of brushed off the goodbye and said, we're Endgame. So
yeah, this isn't goodbye.
I do think that they have something in mind for something bigger. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that dealing with the plot holes, maybe we flesh that out a little bit more next season. I don't think that that's what next season is about.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we're solving that next season.
Well,
if it's something to solve, maybe that just is like a question that never gets answered.
Yeah. But because there are, I think, a little bit of plot holes in this season, or like things that just were never addressed, like the ham from Portugal. Like, who's going to be looking in and being like, oh, they got their weekly Portugal ham. It's clearly wrapped in a Portugal flag, so that's got to be where it came from. As well as like, why was Hammy Faye Baker in the Dudenoff apartment if he had died and it was Helga's pet?
I mean, Helga did say that that's the only place in New York where you can have a pig.
But why in the Dudenoff apartment?
Because she can't keep it in the other people's apartments because there's people there that don't want her pig there. So she probably comes in daily and feeds her pig. I don't know.
Well, but then also Marshall killed in there was the pig in there? I don't know. I just feel like that was a weird thing. And maybe that's just, it seemed like Helga hadn't been coming around to the apartments.
She might have been coming around. They might have they were trying to not communicate with her. So they might have just been like, who knows? Maybe she like knocked on Rudy's door and Rudy looked through the peephole and everybody said like, she's crazy. Don't talk to her, or not. She's crazy. Like, don't talk.
She can't find out the secret.
She's not contacting them because she thought they were killers.
Maybe, but then why would you?
And
leave
so
your pig
she was.
there?
So maybe she was probably sneaking in at nighttime.
No,
Being her
maybe.
pig. I don't know.
There's just couple plot holes.
I can see that.
So, you know, I'm curious if they touch on these again.
Yeah.
Like I said, I love the Westies, love their inclusion. I wish the Westies got their own season. I think that could have been a lot better.
I'm hoping we continue to see them, and they're like just
recurring characters.
And once again, it could be like Uma, where it's like we don't have to see them all the time, but you know, we get these like small interactions with them, so it doesn't take up too much of their time, and maybe we have an episode where we get a little bit more of them. Who knows?
Now, what do you think the future with Meryl Streep is going to be?
I mean, they gave her a nice out to not have to be in it too much.
Yeah.
So she's going to be in New Zealand. So I think we'll like very occasionally see her.
Yeah.
I think this was so sweet how they got the wedding. And I read an article which was really touching.
There you go, reading again.
Meryl Streep. I can't help it. I read good.
You read good.
I read good. So last season 3, episode 5, I think that's when they're on the boat and getting kind of romantic.
Mm-hmm.
Filming that brought her to tears because she never thought that at that point in her life that she would be getting the opportunity to do romantic scenes. And so that was just like this amazing opportunity. And that's breaks my heart. It's not just young people that fall in love, and we don't have to only see young people in Hollywood fall in love. And it's sad that doesn't get to be portrayed to the point where it would bring somebody to tears to have the opportunity to film that at that point in their life.
Yeah, to think that like Meryl Streep is like one of the most critically acclaimed actors in you know her lifetime, and she like knows the system, and she's like, yeah, old people don't fall in love with movies. That makes me just love their whole love even more, because Martin Short and Steve Martin, they joke about their age and this a lot, and they are getting older, and bringing in Meryl Streep and like being able to like have a love story in this kind of fun murder mystery comedy. Like, I do feel like this show hits a lot of genres as well. Like, it's got the comedy, it's got mystery, but it does really hit heartfelt moments. Not just like the relationship with Martin Short and Meryl Streep, but like seeing the bit with Martin Short and Steve Martin being sad about their friendship and what does that mean going forward. And, this episode talking about moving to New Zealand, where she's like, you can't leave them. They're like your best friends. Like, that's right. I can't ask you to do that. And like really, really heartfelt moments that this show balances well with comedy.
Yeah. I think genre bending is a good way to kind of put it. I was surprised as I was doing the second watch through of some of the shots that I wouldn't normally expect from a comedy. When they're on the ledge.
Oh yeah.
They went in between some kind of like physical comedy moments and also some touching moments. But there was one shot in particular where a lot of the shots look like, okay, that's a set and you're just like green screening what's below to make it seem scary. But there was one shot where like the camera panned.
Yeah.
And it, for a comedy, it looked surprisingly cinematic and made it feel like the stakes were real. I know that they're obviously not going to fall and nothing's bad going to happen, but it made it feel like that. And I was a little surprised with that for a comedy. And also when Sazz was confronting Marshall and she was in one side of one of the rooms, he came in through the door and there were like 2 arches, like cutouts. It was beautiful framing because there was a big wall that you see between them. It made them look very separated. which was very similar to like how they're separated now because she's lost her trust in him.
Yeah.
You know, so it was like physically showing the separation that has gone on kind of emotionally, and little surprise with like a comedy having that kind of like cool cinematography.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I did notice both of those. Like, those were both two standout moments for me, like the ledge and that scene with her and Rex Bailey. And you bringing that up, I think that just like calls back to that, like, the people that are making this have a real love for filmmaking or TV show making or just making art. And I think that it really shines through. Like, you can tell the love and care. Like, yeah, I have some complaints about some plot holes here and there and how this season ultimately played out. But like, overall, it's like this season, even though my complaints, was still like really good television. And that's rare nowadays. Like, sometimes you don't get that. And like, I think Only Murders in the Building is pretty great for that.
Yeah. If a season isn't perfect for them, it's still so much better than a lot of other TV. The bar is so high, you can be like, oh, you know, this season didn't quite nail it for me. It's still awesome.
Still good. Still good. But with that, I think our journey has come to an end. Thank you guys so much for watching Only Murders in the Building with us. Come back for our next show, which will be Silo Season 2. The show airs November 15th, so we will be on shortly after that. And after that, we have Severance Season 2, so make sure that you stick around for those, because we're really excited about those. Until then, I'm Mark. This is Sterling.
Thanks.